Hi there, this is Hilton Giesenow welcoming you to episode 2 of TheMossShow. In this episode, I'll be interviewing Mike Fitzmaurice. Mike is a well-known personality in the SharePoint community because of the tremendous work he's done for many years at Microsoft on the SharePoint product team. Mike was part of this team for much of the history of the product, but last year he moved to a leading SharePoint ISV, Nintex. We will be discussing in the show some of the background for the company and the reason for Mike's moving there, because in this episode we'll be focusing on what it takes to become a successful SharePoint ISV. So we're going to jump right into Mike telling us more about his move to Nintex and their success as an ISV.
I was proud and I was standing. I was lost in a crowd. But now this room is abandoned. Everybody keep on fading out. I was strong.
Yes, so my experience with the guys at Nintex actually goes back several years. In fact, it goes back to, the middle of the SharePoint Portal Server 2001 product cycle, maybe even the early wave of that. I'd been doing some seminars traveling around the planet to show some partners and customers and whatnot how to scale SharePoint Portal Server 2001 and SharePoint Team Services together. It was an effort Gary Gross and I had done to sort of show that it wasn't just a departmental solution. You actually could make it do really good intranet work. So it was the Microsoft solution for intranets. And we did a seminar in Singapore for the Asia Pacific partners. OBS was a company that was there. They were they were Asia Pacific's first Microsoft Gold partner. Really good guys and clever and personal and so on. We struck up a professional and personal relationship, and we've been friends ever since. What impressed me a lot about them is they were doing Exchange Server consulting, they were doing digital dashboard consulting, they started doing SharePoint Portal Server consulting, doing good work, but they saw that there were a couple of feature gaps in SharePoint Portal Server 2003. The other thing they discovered is that in their consulting practice, they were running into certain consistent problems that bore repeating.
Such as?
Well, certainly the lack of workflow. I and others had mentioned that you can't get everything done in a single release, and it came down to the SharePoint team could have built a really substandard workflow solution and have it closed off. Or they could have built a model that someone can hook into to create a decent workflow system. And my bias has always been, if you've got a choice between product and platform, at least if you're in Windows SharePoint Services, focus on platform. There are other clever people that can build solutions, but only Microsoft can fix platforms. And so that's exactly what the team did. That left it to other people to deal with workflow issues. So they were getting asked about that all the time in their consulting practice. Also, there wasn't anything like a recycle bin. There wasn't any facility for auditing. And they created a product called Smart Library. That was back in the 2003 era. It worked on WSS 2.0 or SharePoint Portal Server 2003, and it offered all three of those things. It was basically an enhancement for any document library in any site. It was really, really nice. And the great thing about it is, when they built it, they used native features built into SharePoint to get it done. So no hacks were required, no strange machinations behind the scenes. It was a pure SharePoint product built on SharePoint for SharePoint. And it made SharePoint better.
So you're talking about, for example, leveraging the API rather than going directly to the database. I know that's one of your particular bugbears.
It is. And one of the other things they wound up doing is, well, for example, a recycle bin was implemented as a parallel hidden document library, and an event receiver would more or less copy files into there every time they changed. Would also check to see if it should purge old versions or something like that. but essentially it allowed them to be able to recall stuff at will. The recycle bin was nothing more than a hidden document library, but the approach worked very, very nicely.
I imagine some of the architectural ideas are still around today in the actual SharePoint product, so the recycle bin itself probably does something similar today to some extent.
It does. It's more organized, it's more centralized, and so on. But yeah, conceptually speaking, it's not that different in the way it behaves. Although, realistically speaking, when something is out and out deleted, it's not like one has to keep a copy of every change to it and then just keep the most recent one lying around in case a deletion takes place. They actually can take the deleted copy and move it to the recycle bin. But the idea is not too far off the mark.
Mike, you raised an interesting point, and it actually came up a little bit under some of the developer concepts that we were talking about earlier, that Microsoft aims more at, or should aim more at platform rather than product. And I think to some extent they've succeeded quite tremendously in the SharePoint space, in terms of using or working to develop the workflow product, or the workflow framework rather than a workflow product inside of SharePoint. And that really opens the door for an ISV ecosystem as well, which is really where companies like Nintex play.
Absolutely.
But it's interesting to sort of adopt that as a semi-official policy, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, and remember, everything with the word SharePoint in it is built by the group that delivers Microsoft Office. Their comfort zone is definitely to build a product as opposed to a platform. But they've learned a lot over the last 3 product cycles, and they've certainly taken a lot of those key pieces of insight and hopefully are applying those to Office 14. But by and large, they've learned how to be a server development group. They started out as a product development group, and it's been absolutely delightful to see the evolution take place.
Yeah, good from outside as well, of course.
Oh yeah, no two ways about it. So, and on that note, what happened was Nintex did another thing that I actually really liked. So 1, they plugged the SharePoint gap. 2, they did so in a way that actually took advantage of SharePoint's platform. 3, when SharePoint evolved in 2007 to provide its own recycle bin and to provide its own facility for auditing and whatnot, the Nintex guys just shrugged their shoulders, rolled up their sleeves, went to work evolving the product in a different direction. So they focused on the workflow. It was nice but not elaborate in 2003. And then in 2007, it actually became a pretty nice, comprehensive solution. And they wound up building it on, again, the workflow platform that was already there. They opted not to try and ignore the workflow facility that Microsoft had built, but rather to sit on top of it and extend it, give it a web-based design surface, provide a whole lot more Windows Workflow Foundation custom activities, provide a means for tracking workflows as they evolve throughout an entire farm, their entire life cycle, and maintain a history on them. Technologically speaking, they again stuck with that idea of build something for SharePoint, but build it on SharePoint. To me, that attitude of we certainly don't want to complain that Microsoft renders the product obsolete. It just gives us something new to do, and it also gives us more technology to build on. That was the right attitude. So when one of the Nintex founders, Nintex was a spin-off of OBS, if anyone's keeping score here. They made Nintex their subsidiary that was designed to act as an ISV. And when one of the founders decided to move to the United States about a year ago and form a local office here to cover the Americas region, they wanted to know if I'd be interested in coming to work for them. And they made a compelling case, and I already knew they were the right kind of ISV. And it just made sense. Truth to tell, I wasn't looking around. If Nintex hadn't to come by, I probably would still be working at Microsoft, and happily so.
So it's in some ways a loss to the community, but it seems like you've found a way to strike a balance there, that you're still actively involved in evangelizing and sharing your knowledge on best practices and other components.
Well, SharePoint got a whole lot bigger than just Microsoft over the past few years. The work that people did to make it truly a community with a lot of information being produced outside of Microsoft, not just within Microsoft, disseminated out. SharePoint is big. SharePoint is an entire ecosystem now. Certainly Microsoft is at the center of it and the number one player in it, but there are a lot of people out there that are SharePoint people. And frankly, whether you're inside Microsoft or outside of Microsoft, we all know each other. We all work together. And the world benefits as a result.
Mike, let's elaborate more on the ISV model. I think in Intex you've given some great examples of the good practices that they've adopted or that they've made use of in terms of leveraging the platform. But I know one of the things, or one of the ideas that you keen to share some info on is the idea of what makes for a good ISV outside of just the product. Can you give us some info on that and elaborate on that concept?
Well, sure. I can certainly try. Obviously there are many different kinds of ISVs doing a lot of different kinds of good work, but there are a couple of things I think they have in common. But I'll preface all of this by saying that one of the fun little paradoxes that I knew of when I worked at Microsoft, some of the time I'd work helping out Microsoft's sales force on individual customer calls and whatnot, and other times I'd be doing more one-to-many high scalability efforts. But I noticed on the part of a lot of people a reluctance to look at what partners offer. And in this case, I'm thinking of ISVs, not so much services being provided, but partner products.
I think that's true across the board, not just in the SharePoint field. You get a lot of the, it doesn't have the Microsoft label, and we're not going to look into it.
Oh, yeah, sure. Even if it's not a question of credibility, people like to be able to just sign one check to one customer and have one finger to point in one place. I get it, but I'll warn anyone that feels that way that Microsoft actually depends on ISVs to exist. They always go through a period where they look at everything they want to do. That's a combination of things customers are specifically asking for. That's a combination of things other groups within Microsoft are asking for. And it's a combination of things they just think the product ought to do because strategically speaking, they want to take the product in a specific direction. They spell out everything they could possibly do for the next release in one-page specifications. People meet in a room. They aren't allowed to leave for days until they whittle it down to a number of specifications that can be accomplished within a certain period of time. In Office, it's not an absolute rule, but it tends to work out to about every 3 years.
A lot of coffee and a lot of pizza in those sessions.
A lot of coffee, lots of pizza, whatever is necessary, but the gist of it is serious degree, absolute level negotiations happen, and then adds cuts take place, and that negotiation process actually never ends until the product ships. But the biggest effort takes place a few months into a product cycle after all of the one-page specifications have been created, collated, disseminated, and evaluated. Then comes the big negotiations, and then refactoring takes place for the entire life cycle of the product. The thing I'll say about all of this is, you'd be amazed at how many things wind up on the floor that either can't be accomplished or whatnot. Just because Microsoft is a massively huge company doesn't mean they have infinite resources. And besides, those people are spread across lots of different groups. There really is a finite amount of things that can get done within a particular product cycle. 3 years is actually about the magic number because of software assurance contracts, which tend to take place in 3-year cycles. So the idea is to make sure customers' software assurance investments actually pay off. So there's a huge motivation to make sure something is shipped at least every 3 years. And as a result, well, there's only so much you can do in 3 years. So much gets left on the table or on the floor or whatnot. Microsoft's pretty good about seeing to it that the partner community can plug some of the major gaps, and those of us that are active in the partner community actively look for things that can be done to plug feature gaps. That's good enough. I personally don't think it's long-term good enough. You can plug gaps, but you need to be ready for Microsoft to address those themselves, maybe in a subsequent release. What really makes for a really good ISV is to create a product that not only addresses a feature deficiency, but also takes it to the next level and creates genuine business value. So there's something to make IT happy, something to make users happy, and if you really want to go for the brass ring, something to make developers happy too.
And I suspect that involves a variety of different work that, of course, means more than just getting the features right. It also means things like documentation and training and, making sure your API is appropriate and covers enough needs and things like that. So it's quite a task getting all of that right.
Oh, no two ways about it. And Microsoft can do as much as it can, but it certainly isn't going to get everything done. So frankly, I'm happy if they get the platform solid enough and evolved enough to do new things and document it well. Truth to tell, there are a lot of clever people that will create good documentation or supplemental materials that will help people learn and work with SharePoint technology. Yes, of course, if Microsoft can do it all, that's a wonderful thing. But in my career, I've been an IT director, I've been a consultant, I've been involved in developing and producing product, and now I'm involved in an independent software vendor that's creating companion products for a major product like SharePoint. In all of these roles, it's impossible for one company to do everything. The ecosystem matters. The ecosystem is the thing. Microsoft can do things to get us to critical mass. The rest of us are going to have to provide services. Are going to be those educational services, be those product services, be those consulting services or deployment services. There's no getting around it unless somebody, a customer, wants to be remarkably self-sufficient with their own extra software development skills, their own governance skills, their own deployment skills, and so on. And a few companies are like that. More power to them. But for the rest of us, the ecosystem is the thing that's going to get us through any awkwardness. And the ecosystem is actually going to give us opportunities to get more work done in less time.
So, Mike, if one is thinking about producing a product that can form part of the ISV ecosystem for SharePoint, what recommendations could you make to them that would enable them to achieve some of those goals of making IT happy, the users happy, and the developers happy?
Well, sure. First, how can I best put this? Don't fight the product. There are lots of different ways to, for example, Nintex makes a product that does workflow on top of SharePoint. Nintex also makes a product that collects data out of a SharePoint environment, stages it into a data warehouse, and allows for people to analyze what's going on inside of SharePoint land to their heart's content. That product's called Nintex Reporting. There are many other kinds of solutions for SharePoint that from other companies that do replication or that do backup or that do administration or do any of a number of different things. The ones that I've always liked when I was sitting within Microsoft were the companies that never fought the platform. In other words, there are APIs that are produced and provided for a specific reason. Certain companies use those APIs. Other companies fight those APIs. They'll rip and replace pieces of functionality with code of their own that no matter how good it is, ignore stuff that SharePoint does as its native behavior, B, might make the upgrade path really, really nasty, and C, makes debugging or customer support much, much more difficult than it would be otherwise. So, obviously I'm not going to name names, and some of those companies that used to do that don't do it anymore, and so on, but really the best of the ISV community look at not only which gaps are there, but which gaps are actually addressable without breaking or risking breaking the product.
Would it be true to say that some of those companies, I mean, you said that they don't do it anymore, I guess hopefully I would imagine that that's because they've changed their ways, not just because they're not around anymore.
Yes. Actually, in In some cases it's one, in some cases it's the other. And there are some companies that still do good work, but break rules to do it. And again, I think it's completely up to an informed customer can go ahead and do that and have a happy life. It's just they should know what they're getting into when they do that. Generally speaking, if you don't play by the platform's rules, upgrade and support alone are going to be a bit more challenging. You just need to be ready with that.
From an ISV perspective, upgrade, I guess, means two different things. The one is ensuring, as you say, that you leverage the underlying platform appropriately so that when SharePoint upgrades, it has as little an impact on you as possible. But I guess the flip side is also true, ensuring that your product is built in such a way that there's a clear upgrade path for your clients in turn.
Correct. Depending on your point of view, if an upgrade to SharePoint renders your product obsolete, what do you do? Do you find a way to gracefully exit the market, at least with that product, and provide an upgrade path from the feature the way you did it to the feature the way Microsoft does it in the next release? Do you come up with a way to evolve your product so it's better than the way Microsoft does it, and provide an upgrade path from your old version to your new version? And if you're really artful about it, do you do that in such a way that it still plays by all of Microsoft's rules and therefore allows for better support, better upgradability? A lot of tactical and strategic decisions that need to get made there.
A delicate tightrope to walk on both sides of the fence.
Very, very much so. In terms of what are some other key traits that I think matter a lot, the degree to which, well, frankly, their ISVs could, for one reason or another, operate in a relative vacuum and try to do everything themselves. Other ISVs get deeply intertwined with the partner community and make sure lots of people understand their product, and the odds of somebody being able to help out here or there, or that services can work in conjunction with their products, that's always a good thing. For example, Nintex works with a lot of different partners worldwide. They can provide services around our workflow product, our reporting product, and so on. But again, I'm just using this as an example, not that we're the only ones that do it. Lots of companies do that. Partnerships are good. Frankly, bring together people with the best possible skills, providing the best possible assets to create the best possible solutions. I suppose if Microsoft were to simply buy every partner out there and create a company twice its size, then they could give you one check to write. But the odds of it happening are not very big.
To what extent would you say that SharePoint almost requires an ISV ecosystem more than other products? If I look at something like ASP.NET, or if we take the object relational mapper space, you can happily work without an ORM in your development project. It'll take you longer, but the longer might be on the order of weeks or 1 or 2 months over a long-term project. Whereas with something like SharePoint, if you want to try and rebuild from scratch everything that's available in the partner ecosystem, it would appear that it would be a lot more work than with a more simple product or a smaller product.
Yeah, and I see your point. If you're doing ASP.NET development, you could buy third-party controls, but you could also work harder and not buy them and do more of that work yourself. On the other hand, if you're working in SharePoint land, there are some things that if you want to do them, you really need to go to an ISV for them. I actually wouldn't say it's a product that requires ISVs more. I would say that the product operates at a different level in the stack compared to some of the other things you mentioned. It's definitely a platform, but it's also a product. It's a hybrid, if you would. It's built on ASP.NET. It's built on top of SQL Server technology. As a result, it's already made certain application design and architectural decisions. When you make one decision, you agree not to make another decision. So you open one door, you close off another. The more that you've done along those lines, the more, by definition of having made a lot of design choices, you leave things undone. And so, yeah, I suppose depending on what you want SharePoint to do, if you want something, you have to go to a partner to provide it. In most cases, you'd then be forced to choose between someone very clever building a one-off scenario just for you and buying a product off the shelf from an ISV. At least in the second choice, who's going to support it long-term is a bit more obvious because one-off solutions usually don't get built by people that like to hang around and support them long-term.
And potentially also not built by people who have the experience that an ISV might have. Somebody like, Nintex is an example, obviously, because we're talking about them. But, they had the experience from the OBS days of working with SharePoint as a product already. They weren't trying to spin a product off from their first endeavors into SharePoint land.
Oh, yeah, sure. And a lot of ISVs out there actually started providing some services of one sort or another and wound up productizing them. What I can say about that is also buying an ISV product is usually the cheapest way to do it because, for example, one of our products costs per server about the price of one consultant's time for 2 weeks. The economics will vary by country and by supply and demand patterns and so on, but on average, a medium-skilled SharePoint consultant for 2 weeks is the price of a server farm license for Nintex reporting. Now, you can pay one person to do the best job they possibly can do in 2 weeks, and a really good person might be able to come up with something really clever. It may not be long-term sustainable or extensible or anything else, but okay, I'll actually go on a limb here and say there's no way they could build something on the scale of Nintex reporting within 2 weeks. And when I say scale, I don't just mean feature set. I actually mean feature set, support infrastructure, scalability, verification, everything else. It just can't be done. So when you look at the price in and of itself, some ISV products might appear to cost a lot, but they're cheaper than paying for pure services. They're probably cheaper than even doing that in-house if you look at salaries. And essentially, if you're an ISV, you can take advantage of economies of scale, and ultimately, like, ISVs can charge less for what they sell than consultants can do for writing one-off bespoke applications. Microsoft can charge relatively moderate amounts of money for SharePoint itself because they sell so many copies of it, and it's not a one-off solution for one specific customer. Economies of scale keep prices lower, and that's good.
I'd have to strongly agree with that. We've been speaking throughout this discussion about all of the steps and the pieces that are involved in setting up an ISV. It's not just the consulting time, but it's all of the package of the support and the community and the planning and the knowledge and experience with the product. I mean, one thing, bottom line, SharePoint development is harder than, for example, a standard ASP.NET product. And I think people don't always appreciate what that means in terms of time and expertise.
No, that's absolutely right. If you're going to be a SharePoint expert, there's no such thing as a pure SharePoint expert. To be a SharePoint expert, you need to understand ASP.NET, you need to understand SQL Server, you need to understand SharePoint's own object models, and that's a plural, not one thing. To think of SharePoint as one thing as an umbrella term is nice, but there are APIs that focus on storage, APIs that focus on lists and libraries, APIs that focus on user management. Yeah, you need to understand Active Directory. You need to understand identity lifecycle management. You need to understand possibly application extensibility models if you're trying to connect SharePoint to SAP or even simple databases. You might need to know something about business intelligence or search, or it's a long, long list. In fact, there's now an official SharePoint Master certification. It's really, really hard to do. And that's because SharePoint is a really, really hard subject that really requires you to not just be deep, but broad. You have to be what I term a deep generalist in order to really understand SharePoint well and bill yourself as such. The thing I wanted to make sure that I got across, though, is I talked about ISV products as cutting down on consulting time, or we can give you a solution that does one kind of thing cheaper than a single consultant can build it. I'm not shying away from that. But I also don't want to for a minute suggest that having consultants around is not a very, very good thing for multiple reasons, not the least of which is, one, the off-the-shelf stuff isn't always going to fit the bill. Sometimes you really do need custom solutions. It's a very good thing that those people exist for building them. Two, solutions might involve some off-the-shelf components from Microsoft and from ISVs, but they're still very likely to be a last mile or last kilometer aggregation and integration of different products along with extra stuff written on top of it. And thirdly, there's a huge amount of work consultants do that's not just about making the technology work, but about making the company more productive as the result of having used the technology. Nothing can replace that. So really, I see ISV products as enabling and empowering consultants to do better work for customers, not as a means to bypass consultants.
But it's a case of striking the balance of what do you buy versus what do you, well, I guess the build versus buy discussion that we've had forever in software.
Right, and it's really usually a combination of both. And mercifully enough, even with this economy, the demand for SharePoint skills still outstrips supply. Anything we can do to help consultants get more work done in less time and to help customers make better use of consultants to do more interesting, wacky work as opposed to mundane, repetitive work that's already been solved with an ISV product, the better. Everyone's still going to get paid.
Mike, in terms of the economy, I think it's a difficult time for everybody, and it's a good point to talk about what that means as well. From the one side, we've said that it's incumbent on a company looking at a SharePoint implementation, perhaps even more now than before, to look at what is available in the market for the reasons you've mentioned, that in the long term it probably is going to be more cost effective for them. But I think the opposite's true as well. It's a good opportunity for companies to enter the ISV market as well for exactly the same reasons.
Mm-hmm. I certainly wouldn't want to dissuade somebody from entering the ISV market. If you've got the right kind of product and it's going to make people's lives easier and save them money compared to the alternatives, then yeah, it's actually not a bad thing to do at all. Coming in with a Me Too product, that would be a bit, considerably more risky, but not impossible. You might have a Me Too product that does it better, in which case, by all means, jump on in. I will, however, say that ISVs start out usually very small, very lean and mean, and very dedicated. That's a great cycle to be at. But in order to get taken really seriously, both by customers and by partners and by Microsoft as a strategic partner, there's a certain stage at which Microsoft might love the work you're doing, but not necessarily depend on you to plug certain gaps of theirs. At a certain point, when you reach critical mass, when you've got enough people working there, when you've got enough support infrastructure in place, when you have gone through one or two product cycles, and clearly have a strategy for enhancing SharePoint technology or other Microsoft technology, when you have a strategy for upgrades, when you have a strategy for evolving not just the product you're working on now, but other products you might add to the fold later on, when you hit that level of sophistication, then you have arrived. There's some assurance that you'll be around for several years. There's some assurance that you have the wherewithal not just to create a product, but to create some infrastructure around that product to keep it going and to keep it evolving.
But a lot of steps to get there.
Yeah, it takes a while. It's a story that virtually every ISV player is able to tell if they've been around for long enough. So it's not like it's without risks. There are risks, but it's not like lots of people haven't done it before and will continue to do so. I think the more your product can show that it saves money or meets certain needs that would otherwise be one-off projects in a way that's a whole lot more stable, supportable, predictable, evolvable, going into the market at this point in time is not necessarily a bad idea at all.
I think where that's also true, with the lessons of the principles being the same between ISVs, between products, is interesting to see in the SharePoint space, because they do hold true, I think, very much. We see there are ISVs in the market that have been in the market for a long time in other areas. So, other tool vendors and other widget vendors that have, for example, built generic ASP.NET products and controls that are simply expanding their experience around being an ISV, and now building SharePoint web parts and components.
That's true, but this is the part that's a little bit different and interesting. It's really hard to enter the SharePoint market as a pure tool vendor. You almost need to have solution sets put together. A couple companies were successful at it for a little while. Like, okay, I'll name one company by name. It's not an endorsement or necessarily or anything like that, but I think of Chorus. Chorus was around in the bad old days. They were ready to go with some web parts for sale a long time ago, back when SharePoint 2003 shipped. They couldn't sustain that model of just selling web parts and widgets forever. In fact, there was nothing special to that after a period of time. They're now in the business of selling solution building tools and site solution templates and a whole bunch of other things, but they've evolved from a tool company to a solution company. And I can definitely bring them up by name because they were one of the first ISVs around that were focused on SharePoint solution development. That's a lesson to be learned. You can be a Visual Studio ISV by making good tools. And as long as a developer sees it as a time saver or a quality enhancer, you're done. In SharePoint land, you kind of have to do more than that. There needs to be some sort of appeal to deliver value out of the box. A tool isn't enough. A tool might get a developer excited and a couple of developers might buy it, and that's about it. Management tools are something that applies strictly to IT professionals. That might reach critical mass if it's truly universally helpful, but not every enterprise has gotten on the governance bandwagon, and there are plenty of SharePoint customers that are not enterprises. IT is a critical market, but if there isn't something in there for users, something that definitely makes users adopt SharePoint more rapidly, make more use of SharePoint, justify the SharePoint investment more readily, it's a lot harder to penetrate the market and reach critical mass. Some companies have figured that out and taken that approach. Others have carved out a very good niche by being the best IT-focused tool company possible and have reached critical mass within a smaller corner of the total number of people touched by SharePoint. There's no one way to do this, but in all of our cases, we started out tiny, we became respectable and professional and so on, and the community's better for it.
There's a lot of talk these days also around the concept of being a micro ISV. The term's more relatively recent. And there's a lot of, sort of blog posts and guidance and podcasts and things like that around the process and around setting up shop. And I think it's a great time for people to look into that if they've got the skills and they've got the idea to make use of it as well. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting, as you say, that you should try, don't necessarily go to market and pin all your hopes on one particular web part, but try and be a little bit more broad-reaching.
Well, you could probably go to market with one web part as long as you figured out how to monetize that best. If you were still in the services business, you could give away certain web parts in order to attract attention to the type of work you do and to basically as a promotional gimmick in order to advertise your services. Some people have certainly done that. There are other ways that if you had a particular set of web parts or a particular kind of solution, you could strike a deal with solution builders. Not all ISVs plug feature gaps. Some ISVs create industry-specific solutions. And they'll basically, for example, take SharePoint and apply it to specific Sarbanes-Oxley type solutions. So let me see, healthcare management solutions or so on and so forth. And if you had a particular tool that would help make a solution better, you can basically be a micro ISV and your primary customer are solution builder ISVs.
I think an example of that also in the Nintex fold is the podcasting server to some extent. It's a single setup.exe, so to speak. That's a full packaged product, an end user product.
Actually, it is. I'm glad you mentioned that. We built that. I mean, we do monetize it. We sell it. But we made a conscious choice to make sure that you could install it as a standalone option, but you could also install it in a way that would just work happily with the podcasting kit for SharePoint. And there's something in there. Actually, it appeals mostly to users. It appeals a bit to IT in the sense of we are able to make SharePoint behave as a complete podcasting solution without requiring them to radically enhance their infrastructure. A lot of the things we do to allow people to record podcasts and produce them and edit them, we do with Silverlight controls. So it's actually a fairly easy process to get that grafted into a SharePoint environment and activated as a particular feature definition or site definition and such. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's another whole story just around the deployment model of whatever you're building as well. But again, probably something for a later show when we look into the actual development process.
Yeah, when you want to talk about that, I mean, the SharePoint guys have created ways to deploy software in their environments, and my suggestion is look into them carefully and follow those rules.
Which in some ways hails back to what you were saying about investigate and leverage the platform appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, I think we're pretty much out of time, if I look at the clock here. So I think let's maybe end there. We've covered a lot of different aspects of the product and around the ISV ecosystem and infrastructure as well. So I want to say very much thank you for your time and sharing your expertise with us. It's been great to have the opportunity to talk with you, and hopefully we can have you on to discuss some of these other topics in future shows as well.
I'd be delighted, and thanks for having me on.
Out the window, everybody keep on fading.
If you've got any questions about any of the ideas discussed in this episode, or you'd like to give other feedback, like show topics or requests, then mail us at feedback@TheMossShow.com. To access the archives of all of our shows, browse to www.themossShow.com or www.TheMossShow.com.